All right, so on we are into the final week of the semester. Crazy how that happens. You barely blink and it's done. So we are doing 2 more exercises this week, 128 and 129. We will do sections today. We'll do perspectives on Wednesday. Those are the last 2 of the potential images that you'll use for your assignment 106. So you've already done the elevation, you've already done the plan. We're going to do section and we're going to do perspective. So those will be the 4. You're going to pick the best 3 of those to turn in as your assignment 106. That is due next Monday, so 1 week from today. The portfolio, your final project for the class, which is worth 30% of your overall grade. Remember that because it's important. That is due also on Monday. You guys will come in on Monday, you'll turn in your portfolio, you'll turn in those assignments. You'll finish up any remaining outstanding issues that you might have, and that will be the end of all the graded stuff. So you'll be done. And then on Wednesday, because of the 16-week semester, you do actually have to show up, and I have to check off that you said hi to me. And that will suffice for Wednesday. I know you guys have lots of finals and everything else to be working on. That's why I pushed my stuff to be on Monday, so that you're not stuck with it being due along with everything else on Wednesday and Thursday of finals week. So that's just kind of the way it plays out. And that's how the semester is going to end. On Monday, when you guys come in and you turn in your work, I will have donuts. I always bring donuts on the last day. I know it's not technically the last day, but I'm bringing them that day anyway. And I will also have a survey for you guys to fill out that talks about what you liked about the class, what worked, what didn't work. You know, do you have a better assignment than Charlie Harper for me to use for Illustrator? I ask that every year. I've yet to get a good one. So be thinking about that. It's just ways that I can improve the class and make it better for future semesters. You'd be surprised how much that helps tailor the direction that the class ends up going. So we're going to start today back in the world of SketchUp again. I went ahead and I opened up my SketchUp file. I still have the plan view showing. That was what we used last time. We're going to switch today out of the plan view and into a section view. And for those of you that are early in your architectural career, you haven't quite gotten to the point where you understand the value of a section and why sections are so critical. And it's one of those very interesting drawings because frequently in practice or with a client, you'll show them a section and they'll have no idea what's going on in this particular view or why it's that important. And the truth is that it's important to those of us that are the designers because it is the way that we show what the space feels like to be in. And so if we imagine this room, for example, and we took a floor plan of this room, it would look like a big rectangle. But it wouldn't tell us too much about what it felt like to be in the room. It would tell us how things are arranged, where the desks are, stuff like that. But it wouldn't tell us what does it feel like to be in the room. It wouldn't tell us how far is it from here, if I'm sitting or standing here, how far is it to the end of the room. Those things, the space of the room is shown in section view. And that's why section views are so critical, because it gives us an understanding that this is a really awkward room, that it's really long. And so if I was talking to somebody in the back of the room, I'd have to yell across the room because it's so far. That's something that you don't learn in the plan view. And so it's really important to start to understand and to embrace section. And so we're going to do that today. I'm going to go ahead and go from my standard views. I'm going to go into the ISO view, and I'm going to turn off here my section cuts. And I'm going to orbit my view around so that we can see the front end here. And I'm also going to turn this back into a perspective view because it seems a little bit easier to see. In my styles, let me go back to my hidden line style that was available in default and then hidden line here. Once again, let me turn off all of these. Like that. So when I started thinking about a sectional view, it's important to look at this as a way of understanding what's happening in the space. So when we cut a section, we always want the section to be cut somewhere where there's valuable information to be gained. And if I'm looking at this building, one of the primary features design-wise of this building is the fact that there's a tall section, there's a shorter section, and then there's a taller section. And so I'm going to get more out of cutting a section through this part of the building than I would cutting a section through just a part of this building. Let me use some examples. Let me show the large tool set, and we'll move the section plane around here. Let me go to View, Toolbars. I'm going to check the box for large tool set. And then I'm going to use the section plane tool. So this section plane tool, we can call it section floor. That's fine. I'll go ahead and click on place here. It needs to be oriented to my view. We did the plan view by looking straight down at the object. I'm going to go ahead and orient it so that it's running in this direction along this face. And then I can select the section plane. It's that one there. And I can use the move tool to move that section plane back through my building. And that is one of the really neat features of SketchUp, is that it has this dynamic sectioning tool so that we can kind of look through our building as we start to move it. And so as I'm looking here, we get to a point where, okay, we're seeing the big room, the hallway, and that bedroom a little bit. Now the problem is that this view is really looking at almost nothing because I didn't finish the back half of the building. So in all reality, I'm going to want to flip this around and be cutting through the building looking out the other direction. There are a few other interesting places in the building that might be worth cutting a section. This one out here might be worth cutting a section because we're seeing some of the interior space and some of the exterior space. Maybe right there would actually be a fairly interesting section because we're seeing this interior, and we're seeing this as exterior. Could be interesting, and I might actually do that one today just as a variety because I've typically done the opposite section. So the other section that I've done before, let me go ahead, it's actually, turn off my section planes here, turn off my section cuts. It would be from the back, and this time, let me go ahead and use the move tool. I'd be pushing this forward. Helps if I pick the right one. There we go. There it is. I'd be pushing this forward to find a spot where I'd be looking through the building this way and seeing what this space looked like with the windows, what this space in here looked like, which was the hallway, and then what this space in here looked like for the bedroom. So I'm really trying to find where's the right spot to cut the section to give me the most information about my particular building. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to that section 4 because it's a little bit different. And let's see here. All right, so it's now showing me that. Now, if I'm going to look at this in section view, I don't want it to be in perspective. So right there, it's in perspective. I'm looking at it, and I've got these vanishing points going toward a single point. All these lines, I'm seeing the edge of this wall. I don't want to see that. So I'm going to switch under camera. I'm going to go into parallel projection. And this still isn't quite oriented correctly, even though I'm in parallel projection. So I may have better luck if I actually switch into my standard views and I look at either the front, back, left, or right view. Let me try the back view. I think that was it, yeah, based on my orientation. So now I'm looking at this as a sectional view. I've cut into this space. It would be helpful if I had some windows on the back here so that you guys could see the windows there. But we'll deal with that. Maybe we'll collage that in a little bit later. So I'm going to orient this into my scene. I may do a little bit more. Let me pan this a little bit. I'm going to move this down so I have a little bit more space above. And then I'm going to save this as one of my scenes, assuming that SketchUp doesn't crash out on me. Which it appears to want to. while I'm waiting for SketchUp to come back, the tutorial for this is Assembly 10.3, and there's lots of step-by-steps in this to walk you guys through what you're working on there. So I just wanted to point that out. And it looks like SketchUp's back. Good. So I'm going to go into Scenes here, and I'm going to click the plus sign to save this scene. And here in Scene 3, I'm going to right-click on it to say Rename the Scene. And we'll call this Section 1. Perfect. So I have Section 1. Now with Section 1 showing, I have my hidden line style selected. There's hidden line style. I'm going to turn off my section fill so I can see inside the view here. These section cuts, if I turn them off, I lose the section cuts. So I have to leave that on. So previously we were turning that off. I'm going to leave that one on. I'm going to turn off the axes, and I'm going to turn off the guides. And that gives me the basic line drawing section. I'm going to go ahead and go to File and then Export 2D Graphic. And we'll put this on my flash drive in today's folder. And create a folder for today. And I'm going to add lines to this. Under Options, I'm going to uncheck the Use the View Size, and I'm going to set the width to 5,000. My JPEG is at best quality. I'll go ahead and say OK, and then Export. And that creates my basic line version of this particular drawing. Next thing would be to take a look at what the X-ray view looks like. So I'll switch over into the Edit tab here. I'm going to go onto the Face Settings button right there, and I'm going to turn on the X-ray view. I really don't gain much in that particular view, so I'll go ahead and skip that as one of my exports. The next one would be the shadow view. So I'm going to go to View, I'm going to turn on Shadows, and then I'm going to come over into my shadows here, and I'm going to adjust the date and time to hopefully get a shadow being cast on the building. And so in this scenario, I'm getting absolutely no good shadows being cast on the building, no matter what date and time I'm creating. So that one ends up being not very useful. It does happen, right? So I was hoping to get some kind of a shadow in here, but I wasn't able to get one because of the orientation of the building, etc. So that one didn't really help out too much, so I'll go ahead and turn off the shadows. So I don't have that as an export. I'll go back to my styles, and now I'll do the two artistic styles. Let me go into the Select, and then I will choose, instead of default styles, I'm going to go to Sketchy Edges. I'm going to do the airbrush with the endpoints. I'm going to turn off my section planes. I'm going to turn off my section fill. I'm going to turn off my guides, and then I'll go to File and then Export 2D Graphic. And this is Airbrush. And I'll go ahead and click on Export. And the last one that I liked was the pen gray. We'll pick on that one. Same thing, uncheck section planes, uncheck section fill, uncheck guides, and then I'll go to File, Export 2D Graphic. And this is the pen. And I'll export that as well. Perfect. Now for some of you, depending on how the model was made, there may be a view where you can have the section fill turned on and it will fill in the parts of the model that have been cut through. In my case, it fills in this whole room, so that's not quite desirable, so that's why I've left it off. I'm going to manually do it in Photoshop a little bit later. But I wanted to point that out as an option for you as well. So at this point, it's time to open up Photoshop. Maybe. There we go. And just like we've done in the last times, We've gone to File and then Open to start. And I'm going to navigate to the Lines version. There's my lines right there. That'll be the first one that opens up. Perfect. With that one open, I'll go to File and then Place Embedded. And I'll bring in the airbrush. I'll go to File and then Place Embedded. And I'll bring in the pen gray. There we go. Now for each of these layers, I'm going to switch and change them to be in multiply mode. Same thing here, that's in multiply. And the original layer here, the background layer, which had my lines on it, I want to release that out into a live working layer. So I'll right-click on the background layer and say Layer from Background. And it will create a layer. The default is called Layer 0. I'm going to go ahead and call it Lines. And I'll say OK. So I have lines. This airbrush, I'm going to rename that. Let me double-click it to rename it. I'll call it Airbrush. And we'll rename this one to be Pen. Perfect. So I have my 3 layers right there, there, and there. One of the other views that can be useful sometimes, and I'll go ahead and do this export as well, I'm going to switch over into the default styles again. And I'm going to switch back to one of the ones that has colored background, like this. And I'll go ahead and turn off my section fill, my axes, and my guides. And I'll export this so that I can use the colors as a way of selecting certain regions. So I'll go ahead and go to File and then Export 2D Graphic. And I'll call this one Color. And I'll export. And I'm just using this for selection purposes. So let's go ahead and bring that into Photoshop. I'll go to File and then Place Embedded. There's the color. And this color version is also going to go into Multiply so we can see through it. And I'm going to call this one just Color. There it is. I'm not going to end up leaving the color version on long term, but it's going to help me with these selections as I start to make it. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to fill in the ground. And we did this on the elevation view. And we're going to do it again here in the section view. The difference is that I'm filling in the ground, but I'm also going to fill in the inside of the building, or what's been cut through as part of that building. So I'll start. I'm going to use the Magic Wand tool. I'll be on the color layer, and I'll select that region. And again, the color layer makes it easy to make these selections. I'll hold down Shift, and I'll also select the insides of these walls. Like that. We'll select that section there, and that section right there, and that piece right there. So I've selected all of that section fill. Then I can go ahead and create a new layer. I'm going to call this layer Section Fill. And then I will paint using my brush tool with black. That's my current foreground color. I need to make my brush size a little bit larger here. There it is. I could actually use the bracket keys on the keyboard to make it a little bit bigger. I might also, for ease, change the hardness to 100%, which is going to give me a sharp circle when I fill it in. And we'll go ahead and fill all of this in. So I'm filling in everything that's been cut through. Like that. And then I'll go ahead and I'll deselect it. So we're seeing what's been cut through. It now appears pretty easy where I can see, OK, this has been cut through, this hasn't been cut through. And that's a large part of the design in this particular view. So the other thing that ultimately I want to do is I want to add those windows in that I failed to add in. So just don't let me forget, and I will add those windows in here so that we can see that as we get moving forward. OK, so I have the sectional fill. Now, right now, the sectional fill is perfectly flat. And in reality, that's not going to usually be the case. So it would be nice to add a little bit of texture to this, or a little bit of slope. I'm going to use the lasso tool. And I'm just going to make a little bit of a selection here where this goes up and down, maybe like that. I can hold down Shift and add to the selection to create a little bit of a hill there, maybe something like that. Perfect. Then I can go back to my brush tool, and I'm still on that section fill layer, and I can fill that in, and I can fill that in there. And that gives us a little bit of undulation to the ground. The next part of that might be to add some grass to this, or some texture to the ground, so it's not quite perfectly sharp. Now, if we were collaging this in an urban scene, not in a Yosemite meadow, we might want to keep it relatively sharp, or have a sidewalk or something like that where it's a nice sharp line. In our case, it is in the middle of a meadow, so it kind of makes sense to do it with grass. So I'm going to go ahead and use my clone stamp tool with the grass brush. And the grass brush is hidden under the legacy brushes. To make them appear, I'll click on the little gear icon, and I'm going to go to legacy brushes. There it is. Under legacy brushes here, we'll scroll down. It'll be the default brushes, and we'll scroll down. And there's the grass brush right there. So the grass brush works using the clone stamp. I'm going to hold down Alt to copy from down here in the black. And then I'll come up here, and I'll start to create the grass. There it is. And this softens that edge a little bit. So it doesn't have to be perfectly precise. We'll just fill that in a bit. Perfect. We'll move to the opposite side right here, and we'll continue on with a little bit of grass. All right. So we have a little bit of grass, and that softens up that edge a little bit and gives us that sectional plane. OK, so I have the grass brush applied. My section fill has been applied. All of that's looking pretty good. Now it's time to start thinking about what's going to go on with the background of this particular image. Now, if this was an actual project, we would visit the site. We'd have an actual background image to work from. But alas, we have not the time nor the funding to go to Yosemite, as much as fun as that would be. So I have to find my own image. I'm going to do an image search. We'll just do Google Images. And I'm going to type in Yosemite. And I find Yosemite Meadow tends to help narrow down the search options here. Now, before I actually pick any of these views, I'm going to go into my tools, and I'm going to change a couple things. Under usage rights, I want to make sure that it's labeled for reuse with modification. I'm also under size going to make sure that it's larger than at least 2 megapixels. I prefer larger than 4 megapixels. We'll see what my results are when I choose 4 megapixel and see what happens. So we've got a variety of options here. Remember, we want to pay attention to what's happening in the foreground and the background. This image looks pretty nice. This one also looks pretty good. And I have a tendency to open up files in the background. This image, while it's nice, has those big rocks in the foreground. It also has a tree right on this side that's going to be challenging to deal with the elevation view. It's going to change our scale a bit, so I'm not going to use that one. This one could work. I don't want ones with water in the front, so we're not going to do the water view. You know, this one actually with the trees, it might work. So you just scroll through, and I have a tendency to open them up in separate views. This helps me decide which one's the best option. I'm going to go ahead and save this image. Actually, let's visit it. There we go. Let me get the largest version of it. There it is. And we'll go ahead and save image as, and I'll put it into today's folder. And I'll save. So this image is not bad, but it had that little walkway in it right here. That's going to be a little bit challenging. It might work really nicely for our perspective view next class, but it's not going to work out so well for us in this class. This view here, scale's going to be a little off on these trees. There's not quite enough space before this tree. So you always have to kind of balance it out. I think this is the best, this is the best image for what I'm trying to do. So with that image selected, I'm going to go ahead and go to File and then Place, and I'll place Embedded with this particular image. So there it is. Let me zoom out by 1, and I will make this image large enough so that it fills the screen. Now I have to pay attention to where the horizon line is and what I'm seeing. Sometimes it's easiest on this to adjust the opacity temporarily, so I can kind of see through it here. And as I start to adjust this, I want to think about whether I'm looking at a little bit of an upslope, a little bit of a downslope. What do I want to see? Where's the null, etc. So it's probably right about there or so. I'll go ahead and commit to it. There it is. I've lost part of the image up top here. I can get that back by going up to my canvas size, anchoring it at the bottom, and then increasing the height of the canvas. So we could say maybe 40. And that's going to give me the rest of my image up top. Don't worry that some of it's getting clipped. That's because the blue didn't extend all the way, so we're not seeing it as well. OK, let me change the opacity of that back up to 100%. There it is. Now we're seeing the full image itself. I'll turn that off, and I'm going to turn off my color, and I'll turn off my section fill, so I'm back down to my just my lines here. Well, actually, I might turn my color back on temporarily because it'll help me make some selections here. I'm going to use the magic wand to select the, on the color layer to select all this blue. I'll hold down Shift and add to the selection this upper section, like that. Now, on my particular case here, I'm looking through this particular section right there because this is an open little doorway. So I need to make sure I select that. Likewise, I said I wanted to add some windows here that I failed to add in my SketchUp model. I'll add those after the fact. Let me hold down Shift to add to selection, and I'll draw in some tall, skinny windows for myself here. So the preferred strategy here, of course, would be to do them in Photoshop, not to do them after the fact. But you can add them after the fact. I want to make sure that those bottoms are even. So I'm going to deselect just a little bit of the bottoms to make sure they're nice and sharp across the bottom. Sometimes that's a good strategy as well. OK, so I've selected this, all this background. I've selected where those windows are. I'll come back to my Meadow view here, and I'm going to click on the Add Layer Mask button, which is going to cut out my background for the pieces that I'm seeing, or so for what I'm looking through. Likewise, I can turn back on my section fill. And I'm confused why my grass didn't show up. My section fill needs to go on top. There we go. Needed to go up on top. So now I'm looking through. I'm seeing through these windows. If there was a window here, I'd be seeing through that. These are windows into my building, not all the way through. So I'm paying attention to what I'm seeing all the way through and what is outside of it. Actually, I think this probably should have been filled in as well. It depends on where that section cut was. Maybe not. Maybe it's still in elevation view. OK, so now I have the background installed. In some cases, you may want to make some adjustments to the background to distinguish between the interior windows and what's happening outside. And so I might make a modification to this particular section of my background image. So let me go ahead and add a layer mask, or excuse me, let me go ahead and add an adjustment layer. I'm going to go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and let's do a Hue and Saturation Adjustment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the hue and saturation, hopefully not to purple, just to tweak the colors. And it's interesting because I'm really not seeing much of a change because this is so just trees. through there. So maybe instead of that, I might do a saturation adjustment so that it turns black and white or it turns color in one place or the other. I think I'm going to leave the through the building in color, and I'll make the rest of it in black and white as a way of identifying it. So I'll drop that to black and white, so I have my background image there. But I don't want this adjustment to apply to these windows. So I'm going to go ahead and create a selection around those windows, and I can do them all at once here. And I'm going to, in the mask on this particular layer, we did this earlier in the semester, I'm going to paint with black so that that doesn't apply in that section. So I've added this mask to right there. The background is black and white, but the image that we're looking through here is in color. It's a way of differentiating what's a window and what's outside. I could do the reverse if I wanted to. I just don't think you're going to see it as well. If I did the reverse just so you can see it, let me invert this. No, well, it didn't want to do it for you. OK, well, it doesn't really matter. The point is that I can do it the opposite if I wanted to. OK, so I have that. I want to tie it only to the Yosemite layer. So let me pull this down there, and I'll press Control-Alt-G to tie my Hue and Saturation Adjustment just to the background image. And that's where we're seeing the color and the black and white. The other thing that tends to happen, tends to be a good strategy, is to fade out the top of the photograph. I can do that, again, in the mask view of the background image here. I need to make a selection. So it might be best to use the color to do that. I'll use my magic wand. I'll select, there's basically the background. I'll switch back to my mask. There's my mask. And I will use the gradient tool to go from black to white. My foreground color is black. My background color is white. I'll start by dragging from up top here down into my image. And then when I let go, it's going to start to fade out what I'm seeing. Now remember, the closer this line is, the quicker the fade happens. The longer this line is, the longer the fade happens. Let me turn off the color so you can see this a little bit better. So it's just a matter of personal preference as to how long you want that fade to be. I'm going to do it right there because it's kind of at the top of the mountains. And I'll go ahead and deselect it. So I have that mask so that this fades out nicely. I have my color version coming through here. Now it's time to think about what's happening inside the building. Maybe we want to collage in some textures to be the inside of the building. We also might decide that we want to accentuate the windows on the outside so that those are seen as windows. That's another option. So let me go ahead and I'm going to turn back on the color layer temporarily because this is going to help me make selections. I'll go ahead and use the magic wand tool, and I'll select. Actually, you know what? I need to bring in a sky. I already have skies downloaded, but I could do a Google image search for something like cloudy sky, for example. And I could pick one of these images. I already have a bunch on my flash drive, so let me bring those in. Let me go to File and then Place Embedded. And I have them in my Resources folder under Collage, Skies. And I have a bunch of different cloudy skies. Let's pick this one. We'll drop that one in like that. Let me turn it off temporarily. Oh, sorry, I have to commit to it. Let me turn it off temporarily. I'll use my magic wand to select each of those windows. Whoops. Need to be on the color layer. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Selected all of those windows. With those windows selected, I can go back to my cloudy sky, and I can click on the Add Layer Mask to cut out just those windows. So that's a way of identifying those windows. In all reality, that needs to be a little bit lighter in its color, so I might have to tone down the opacity, maybe something like that. Well, you guys can't see it. It looks good on my screen. OK, so maybe I want to put in some concrete texture inside the building. Next thing would be to find that concrete texture. Again, I already have it on my flash drive, but you could do a tiling concrete texture, and you could pick up some texture depending on what it is that you were after. I'll go ahead and bring something in. Let me go to File and then Place. Embedded, there it is. And there's a concrete texture that I can bring in. Now, these are plywood pieces that are 4 feet. So I need to be a little bit aware of how tall this building is so that my scale is appropriate. So that was 16 feet in height, that particular section. So I need to make sure that I have roughly 1, 2, 3, and 4 showing of my texture. So it's about like that. We'll bring this over to about there. Now the advantage of the fact that it's a tiling texture is that once I commit to it, there it is, I can go ahead and I can copy it. I'm going to press Control A to copy, or to select all, Control C to copy, and then Control V to paste. And I can then take the second version of it and line it right up with the first version. Like that. I might need to make a few little adjustments with my arrows, but that essentially gets me to all of that particular texture. So it's these 2 layers, there and there. Let me merge those 2 layers together. I'm going to hold down Shift to select both layers. I'll go up to Layer and then Merge Layers. And they're in 1 layer now, and this is called Concrete. Again, I do that for clarity so that I know what my various layers are. And now I need to mask off that layer in the places where it belongs. So let me go ahead and turn off the concrete there for a second. I'll use my magic wand tool, and I'll need to make my selection. Sorry, let me use my lines to make my selection. It will be there, there, and there. I could also choose, if I wanted to include that piece and or the pieces that are outside those pieces as well. Again, that's an option that you can decide on. Because I cut these windows in after the fact, I do need to make sure that I exclude those. So let me hold down the Alt key to subtract from the selection, and I'm going to subtract that window, that window, and that window. Sometimes you need to clean it up a little bit. Oops, that was supposed to be Shift. Maybe like that. All right, so let's just go with it. Once I've done that, I can switch back to my concrete layer, and I can click on the Add Layer Mask, and it will cut it out for that particular part of my building, like that. So I've given myself a little bit of texture in that. Maybe I want to add a little bit of shadow inside the building to kind of differentiate what's going on here. If I want to do that, I can use a dodge and burn layer. Let me go to my Layer, New Layer. Remember, it's just a regular layer here. If I can find, there it is, Layer, New Layer. Dodge and burn. This is going to be an overlay, and it's filled with the neutral 50% gray. Go ahead and say OK. Now in this dodge and burn, I want to work just on the inside of the building. So I'll use my magic wand, and again with the color to help my selection here, we'll select the inside of the building, like that. And then I can go back to my dodge and burn layer, and I can select the burn tool. Here it is. Make my brush a little bit bigger, and we can choose to darken that up. And it's taking longer than I wanted it to. So anyway, I would have to spend a little bit more time trying to get that a little bit darker, just to add a little bit of texture around the outside. I don't even know if you can see this up top here. Yeah, you can see it a little bit. Where I'm darkening up the upper edges. Like that. OK, so maybe we want to add some artificial light to this particular building. That's also doable. I'm going to do that using a new layer. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Layer, and we'll call this Light. And on the light layer, I'll switch my blending mode into soft light mode. So light layer, my blending mode is in soft light. I'm going to pick a yellowy color, something like that. And I will use my brush, but I don't want it to be hard. I want it to be very soft. So it's a soft brush. Let me zoom in here a little bit. I'm going to decrease the size of the brush here. I'm going to start small up toward the ceiling. So we'll start there. As I come down, I'm going to increase the size of the brush to start to make a cone of wash coming down. Do you guys see how I fan that out a little bit? If this ends up being too strong on the light layer, you can always change the opacity of that down so that it's a little bit less. So I'll do that again, small to start at the source of the light. As it comes down, we make it a little bit bigger. And then we get to the bottom, like that. I'll come over, do the same thing on this section. A little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. That. Start small again. And I'm doing this with the brackets keys on the keyboard. Like that. So I'm creating those streaks of light. Again, they seem a little bit strong to me. Even on the projector, they seem a little bit strong. So I'll probably end up adjusting the opacity down in a much smaller range, maybe something like that at 45. Let me press Control 0 so I can zoom out. Maybe not. Control 0. There it is. And we can start to see what this overall piece looks like. I'm going to turn off my color again so that I don't end up forgetting to have that turned off. Looks like I'm getting a little bit of a band up here at the top. Let me go ahead and crop that off. I'll use my crop tool right here. No, that was not it. It's cropping to my selection. There we go. Let me just pull that down just a little bit, like that. OK, so you guys can see how this is working. Now, the last piece that always helps a section is to put a person into the scene, because it gives us a sense of scale. So I'll go to File and then Place, and I'm going to bring in one of those silhouettes that I created way back in exercise, what was it, 107, something like that. So I'll go back into Collage, I'll go into People, and there's my silhouettes. I'll go ahead and put in, let's put this one in. She's much too large, so let's make her much smaller here. Like that. I have to pay attention to how tall she would be. Remember, I worked on those overall scale here. If these are 4-foot panels, she needs to be down at about that size for it to be appropriate. Make sure that she's touching the floor. I also don't really like that she's facing the wrong direction, so I'd like her to stand here and look that way. Alternatively, I could put her over on this side, and she's looking that way. You just want to pay attention to which direction somebody's looking. So let's bring her back over here, like that. I want to change the direction she's looking, so I'll go to Edit and then Transform, and I'm going to flip. I think it's horizontal. There it is. And she's looking the correct direction. I also don't really like that she is in gray and the rest of this is in black, so I can add an adjustment layer to her. So let me go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. I'm going to do a Levels Adjustment, and I'm going to tie it directly to her, so Control-Alt-G to tie that to her. And then with my Layers Adjustment, or with my Levels Adjustment here, I'm going to adjust her to be black, like that, so she matches the background. The alternative would be to change the section all to be in white. That's the other option. And I did that before last time, so you guys can see that that's certainly another option. Okay? So this is the process of creating a section view. A large part of creating a good section view is finding the right section view of your building. So think about it, decide which piece of the building you really want to cut, and then once you've cut it, bring it into a scene and collage it. The other question that I'd like to go over really quick before I turn you loose today is I frequently get the question, why wouldn't I always just do this in Photoshop? Why do I need to use Illustrator? Or why do I do it in Photoshop instead of doing it in Illustrator? What's the advantage, or why is it in one versus the other? So a couple things to make note of. When we worked in AutoCAD and we created the paper space and we exported that, all of the drawings were to a specific scale. They were all at 1/4 inch equals a foot, and when they came into Illustrator, they stayed at scale. And ultimately, when you went and printed them, they were at a specific scale. When SketchUp exports, we're exporting an image size. It's no longer at any particular scale. It's whatever the pixels are and however large it decides to print. So it is to scale in the sense that the proportions are the same, but we can't say it's at 1/4 inch equals a foot. So if I wanted this drawing that I spent time on, this section, to be at scale, a specific scale, I would have to take this and bring it into a program like Illustrator or InDesign and adjust it or scale the image such that this was, if this is 16 feet, for example, and I wanted to do it at 1/4 inch equals a foot, I'd have to have that be 4 inches tall. And so I'd have to actually scale it in Illustrator such that this drawing had 4 inches so that it was to scale. Does that make sense? So Illustrator tends to be where we keep things and preserve scale. Photoshop tends to be where we do collage work to give us an overall look of a building. And so this can work just fine in a presentation because it doesn't necessarily have to be at scale. But we have to be a little bit aware that if we use this as a section and we also use the elevation view, they should be the same size when they go to print. One wouldn't be smaller than the other so that they appear to be matching, if that makes sense. So that's the big difference between Illustrator and Photoshop. Photoshop is not at scale. Illustrator tends to keep things at scale. And so there's advantages to both. Okay? So I'll let you guys work today to create your section view. This is the goal. Next class, we'll do the perspective view, which is kind of the culmination of all the stuff that we've been working toward throughout the semester. All right?